In 1943, Japan was engaged in combat with Allied forces in the Pacific. It was in need of a valiant war machine to fuel its fast supply lines, which were now spread thinly across thousands of islands and a vast territory. It had been successful in seizing a war machine that had the potential to become the largest seaplane ever conceived of. Kawanishi Plant was given the task of constructing a 400-ton megaplane by the Imperial Japanese Navy, which included the explicit directive that the plane must be of a certain size and scale. The world had never seen stats belonging to what would have been a massive aircraft like the Kawanishi KX-3, which is known as the Godzilla plane. These stats were the largest the world had ever seen. Even if it was never put into production, the fact that it was ever considered a viable option in the first place demonstrates a remarkable level of creative ability, according to some aviation enthusiasts. Why was this mega aircraft proposed in the first place, if not out of a touch of wishful thinking or even arrogance? And how exactly would it have changed the course of the war in the Pacific? The story starts during a time in the Pacific War when Japan was no longer in ascendancy. At this point, the United States entered the war in response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and it was engaged in combat against the Japanese military alongside its allies all across the region. The once impressive naval force was getting regularly thumped by Allied forces, and even Japan's merchant fleet was under constant threat of attack from Allied forces. This had dire consequences for Japan because it meant that supplies and manpower could not be easily replenished between the various islands that were occupied throughout the Asia-Pacific region. The war in the Pacific was also massive in scale, with much of it taking place on remote and far-flung islands. The war had become a logistical nightmare for the empire, and as a result, in the year 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy gave orders to the Kawanishi Plant to construct a solution to this problem. The war had become a logistical nightmare for the empire. This solution would need to be able to transport up to 1,000 soldiers or Imperial Marines at once along with all of their gear. It is obvious that the KX-3 was to be over 2 times larger in both wingspan and length when compared to the Hughes A4 Hercules, which was built in 1947 and is commonly and famously known as the Spruce Goose. A more modern seaplane flying boat comparison might be the Soviet Caspian Sea Monster, but even that huge plane doesn't even come close to any metric to the sheer moxie of the KX-3. The most obvious challenge in terms of design and technology that the Kawanishi engineers needed to overcome with the KX-3 was also one of the simplest. The question was how to get such a massive plane into the air and allow it to fly under its own power. The imperial government presented the engineering team with a challenge, and the only option available to them was to accept it and move on. The Kawanishi team was able to speed up the development process by using the company's own tried and tested HAK flying boat, Emily, as a point of departure for their work. The reasoning behind this was straightforward. All of Emily's dimensions should be retained, and then they should be scaled up until they transform into the enormous KX-3. This meant that the KX-3 would have a hull similar to a boat for use during waterborne takeoffs and landings, as well as the main plane for its wings that had a wide span to match. This aspect of the design would be extremely significant in determining whether or not the enormous plane would have the required amount of lift and drag. Additionally, in order to improve both the lift and the drag capabilities of the wings, long-running flaps would be attached to the trailing edges of both wing members. In order to achieve the greatest possible improvement in aerodynamics, the fuselage featured flat sides and a rounded dorsal surface. Additionally, it featured outboard sponsors, which were projections from the side of the aircraft and were able to support the massive appendages of the aircraft near its midway points. The control and additional stability of the aircraft would be provided by a pair of high-reaching vertical fins that would be mounted on the tail unit at the very end of the fuselage. Over the years, details regarding the amount of horsepower that would have been supplied by the KX-3 have varied. One theory suggests that the turboprop engines would have amounted to approximately 100 horsepower, and each engine would have driven multi-blade propeller units in pooler fashion. In addition, the KX-3 would have been augmented by a further 4 to 6 turbojet engines. By the way, this turbojet technology would have been made available courtesy of Nazi Germany. It would have been possible to complete this journey at a top speed of approximately 345 knots, with a stall speed of 120 knots if the aircraft had ornaments aboard. The aircraft would require a crew of 24 men, and its range on a full load is approximately 18,000 kilometers, which is equivalent to 11,500 miles. Although its arsenal was never actually finalized, it was obvious that this relatively slow and lumbering aircraft would have needed a good mix of automatic cannons and machine guns to defend itself had any American foes strayed over its path. This aircraft would have truly changed the face of logistics for the Japanese armed forces, and to pull it off the selection process, the Japanese government had to make a tough decision. During World War II, the Kawanishi Aircraft Company was one of the most important and successful aircraft manufacturers in Japan. It was established in 1920 in Hyogo Prefecture as the Kawanishi Engineering Works. In order to break into the world of aviation, the company developed the Kawanishi KX-3 mail-carrying aircraft in 1921. This allowed the company to take off, both figuratively and literally. Toward the end of the 1920s, the company was already attempting to break long-range records with the K-12 Sakura that they had in their possession. From the 1930s onwards, Kawanishi designed and constructed an impressive and diverse range of aircraft. A few of these aircraft are worth mentioning here as they help explain why Kawanishi was the perfect choice for the later KX-3 mega project. The H-6, dubbed Mavis Kawanishi Engineering Works, was set to full power with the development of other aircraft like the famous Emily Patrol flying boat, and scores of other prototype planes were made, but eventually not mass-produced during the war. However, this was the evidence needed to show how just prolific and ambitious the engineering works were. Aside from the plane's advanced aeronautics, it also had more traditional features, such as self-defense. To protect the slow, lumbering plane from enemy fighters, the KX-3 would probably use the same mix of automatic cannons and machine guns as the other Kawanishi flying boats. Even though its defenses were never finished, it can be assumed that the nose and tail would have been protected by a 20mm automatic cannon, or something similar, and that several dorsal turrets could have been easily installed along the vast length of the dorsal fuselage spine, each possibly holding two 13mm air-cooled heavy machine guns. Along with this, there would have been similar gun mountings on each side of the fuselage. In any case, the expected turboprop engines took a long time to develop and were a technological nightmare. And the slow progress of the Japanese turbojet didn't help. When you add in the number of valuable resources that would have been needed to build the huge fuselage and wings of the flying boat, and the fact that the Japanese war situation was getting worse, it was clear that the KX-3 was doomed from the start. The program ended with not much actually done, and the war ended in August of 1945, so there was no hope for this Kawanishi's flying boat project. If the KX-3 had been finished and flown as planned, it would have been the largest plane ever made anywhere in the world. Instead, it became another of World War II's secret weapons that never came to be. That's it for today, guys. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to get the latest update about the fresh and interesting content we keep on posting. See you in the next video.